Blog Talk Radio.
Bigfoots Pad Paranormal Investigations team is in charge of the field. Bigfoots Pad Paranormal Investigations team. Bigfoots Pad Paranormal Investigations team.
And welcome to another exciting edition of Bigfoots Pad Paranormal Radio Show. On the line with me today, I have Nick, also known as the Mothman Warrior 1.0.
Yes, I am here on the line. What's going on?
Nothing much. Today we're supposed to be interviewing Noe Torres. He wrote a book called Other Roswell. It's about a strange event, which includes a UFO crash back from the 50s in Texas. So this should be an exciting show.
Oh, definitely. We'll see what he has to say. I know a very vague outline of the case, but he needs to fill in the rest of the details, at least for me, and I'm looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's supposed to be coming on here in a minute or two, so... Yeah, speaking of UFOs, I heard that there was some kind of a weird fireball on the East Coast somewhere yesterday, I guess around 8 at night. They said it looked kind of like a meteor shooting across the sky, I guess. Do you know anything about that, Nick?
No, I haven't heard about that yet. I'll have to go look on the internet and see what it looks like for myself. It probably was just a meteor, but you always do have to keep your mind open to different types of possible scenarios, so it could have been a UFO.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess if it was a UFO crash, that would be pretty cool. There's a lot of footage about this thing.
A UFO crash?
UFO crash.
Oh, okay. But, yeah, like I said, Mr. Torres should be one of the better guests that we've had on in our show's history. It sounds like he really knows what he's talking about from what I've gathered from my research on the show, and I don't know, I might put him up there maybe with Frank Ficino, Stanton Friedman, and various other guests that we've had pertaining to UFOs.
Yep. I was going to say, yeah, Noe just wrote me on the email real quick.
What if we had a Jeopardy sound clip to break the awkward pauses? or something else that would work quite well. Our listeners probably laugh because whenever we hit awkward moments like this, it often turns into like a comedy show instead of a paranormal show. We just start saying random jokes to try to keep time moving.
Oh, yeah. I guess Noe is trying to connect on here.
Okay.
Yeah, he sent me an email. Well, while we wait for Noe to connect to the line, I say, Nick, do you have any team news of anything that's been happening in the last couple of days?
Well, apparently we've gotten emails relating to some paranormal TV shows. Both had come from a contact that we have with the Sci-Fi Channel, and one was Paranormal Witness, and they said that they're looking for somewhat of a climactic story to end their season. And we have a story, a Bigfoot story, which we are going to give to them, and hopefully that they accept it and we can get back on the Sci-Fi Channel. It's very fun to work with them, and I'm looking forward to possibly doing it again. And then another show is the My Ghost Story show is one that I've never heard of before, but I'm curious to see what they're about. They wanted to get some ghost stories from us, which have photos and video and multiple eyewitness testimony. So again, like I said, I've never heard of the show, but I think that they would be very good people to work with because our contact with the Sci-Fi Channel is a very stand-up, upfront guy. So I trust his judgment on him sending us, show offers like this. So it'll be a good time.
What is it? So, Nick, can you talk a little bit about what we were going to talk about on those shows?
Oh, okay. On the Paranormal Witness show, we're going to talk about our ongoing Bigfoots research project, I guess you could say, at this location out in the rural areas of California. It's the California-Nevada border. It's it's very rural, very out in the middle of nowhere. It's not near any town, so it's 60, 70 miles from civilization. And we have had various different things happen to us there. A Bigfoot sighting, and we've had rocks thrown at us, things whistling at us, wood knocking. It's a pretty active area when it comes to Sasquatch. And then for the My Ghost Story show, we're still kind of brainstorming what we want to use. I mean, we have, 100, 200, we have hundreds of ghost stories. We literally we're going to be sitting around all day sifting through all the different things we have, trying to find the best one. So, I mean, there's a few stories I can think of, but when you think of these stories to send to these shows, you have to take a lot of different things into consideration, like, we're all four of us there. How much evidence do we have to back it up? Would the location of the ghost story want to have any publicity, et cetera, et cetera? So that'll help us whittle things down a little bit.
Yeah. If Noe is saying that it's not letting him come on, or there he is.
Good old Skype. Oh.
I've seen he just entered the chat room. Well, yeah, I guess that TV show wanted us to give some kind of evidence of some sort. So I guess the show is based around evidence. So I guess we're going to try to do that. The company's based out of London, so they're going pretty far out here to contact us to interview us and all that. So it's going to be a good production. But
yeah.
At the same time, there's Noe. Hey, Noe.
Yes, the name's Noe, actually, Noe Torres.
Okay.
But that's okay. That's a common mispronunciation. People not familiar with the Spanish version of Noah, the prophet.
Mm-hmm.
So
all is forgiven. No problem.
Yeah, on the line, it's just me and my other co-host, Nick, on the line for today.
Yes. Hey, how are you doing, Mr. Torres?
How you guys doing? It was a pleasure being on your show today. It is a pleasure, and I'm sorry about the technical issues. I've got about 6 computers all running at the same time and trying to make hide nor hair of them. You know what I mean? As we say in Texas. So anyway, we're going to have a very interesting show and a very interesting discussion, I'm sure, today, because this is one of the most unique and fascinating UFO cases that I personally have ever heard about. And I'll be very happy to share it with you guys on the show today. It's really, I think, going to knock some socks off some people who listen to it for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, definitely.
I was going to say, Noe, would you like to start the interview by talking a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the case?
Yeah, I'm a South Texas author, and I tell people that I'm mainly an author and researcher, and I've had the good fortune to link up with a number of very good, top-notch UFO researchers. And since then, of course, I have gotten into the field a bit myself, and but really folks like Ruben Uriarte, who is the director of MUFON for Northern California, and with whom I have co-authored 3 books, and also my friends Stanton Friedman, Bruce Maccabee, Kevin Randall, and a whole bunch of other people that have helped me along the way. I'm very fortunate to have gotten to know. But I started writing books back in 2001, and I was writing books mainly about South Texas history. I was kind of doing little local research projects about the history of the area where I live. And one of the books I was putting together had to do with UFO cases throughout the state of Texas, and there have been a number of them, as I'm sure you all know, over the years. Really dating back to the 1800s, we had the famous Aurora UFO crash of 1897, which occurred near Fort Worth, Texas. And that was one of the chapters in the book that I was writing. Well, as I was doing some research and looking at some cases throughout the state of Texas, I came across reported crash, mid-air collision between a plane and a UFO back in 1974, and that became it was after I found the data on that case that I hooked up with Ruben Uriarte, who was the only UFO researcher at the time that had done anything related to that particular incident. So I contacted Ruben, and he and I hit it off right away. He knew some people in Texas and was familiar with the area where I live, and we started communicating, and the basis of our research turned out to be our very first book, which was called Mexico's Roswell. And there were about three documentaries done by the History Channel on it, and a number of other projects. We were on the UFO Hunters. Well, while we were doing research for that book, we heard about another interesting case, which is the one we're going to talk about today, which happened earlier. It happened back in the 1950s and involved a gentleman named Colonel Robert Burton Willingham, who still lives today. He's in his middle 80s, and he lives near Wichita Falls, Texas, in northwest Texas. And people kept telling us, and a lot of this early information we got from Bruce Maccabee, who is one of the world's top UFO investigators, as you all know. He's very frequently appearing on documentaries and has written a number of books on the subject. So I had the pleasure of meeting Bruce at Roswell, where I've spoken for the past 7 years as a featured speaker during the annual UFO festival there. So I got some information about this case that reportedly occurred near Del Rio, Texas, 1955. And it so happened that in the year 2000, a local television station in Dallas had done a television interview with Colonel Willingham. It was the first time he had spoken about the case in, 15 or 20 years.
Wow.
And Bruce Maccabee sent me a link, or sent me the contact information for the reporter in Dallas, Texas, who had conducted the interview, Richard Ray. At the time, he was doing a series of TV broadcasts called the Texas X-Files, or actually, it was called the Tex-Files, because back in the 90s, as you remember, the X-Files was a really big deal on TV, and it had quite a huge following. So, so Richard was doing the Tex-Files, and one of the shows he devoted to this strange UFO crash that occurred in 1955 on the Texas-Mexico border near the town of Del Rio, Texas. And Ruben Uriarte, my co-author, and I were able to we did some internet searches, we talked to some people, and we were able to locate the residence for Mr. Colonel Willingham. We contacted him in Archer City, Texas, just outside of Wichita Falls. We made an appointment to go see him. we heard his story, and it really blew us away. Here's a very humble, nuts and bolts sort of guy. He was a military pilot. He has never sought any publicity. He filed a nightcap affidavit back in the 1970s. This was even before the Roswell incident really became public.
Mm-hmm.
He had filed an affidavit with the National Investigation Committee for Aerial Phenomena, which was one of the most highly respected civilian UFO groups of the 60s and 70s, in which he gave a brief rundown of his encounter with a very bright star-like UFO that was zigzagging across the skies of West Texas. Colonel Willingham was in an F-86 fighter jet on military maneuvers out of Fort Worth, Texas, flying to El Paso that day. He and three other F-86s were in a box formation around B-47 bomber, and this was during the height of the U.S. and Russia Cold War of the 50s, and they were actually doing a trial run for what would happen if the Russians were to strike the U.S. with a nuclear weapon. There would be, of course, an immediate scramble of our air defense forces. And so this was a trial run to send bombers from the U.S. On up the West Coast, across the Bering Strait and into Russia to deliver a nuclear payload. That was what Mr. Colonel Willingham was engaged in, those sorts of maneuvers, working for SAC back in the 50s. So anyway, they were in a box formation around this B-47 when they heard a bunch of radio chatter about an inbound bogey coming in from the northwestern U.S. It had been spotted crossing the Canadian border right around Washington State, and it was headed on a trajectory to the southeast, headed toward Texas. And within moments, because it was traveling at over 2,500 miles an hour, within moments it was flashing right past the convoy of jets, of which Colonel Willingham was a part. And it's an amazing story, and if you guys are feeling up to it, I'd like to put on the first clip where Colonel Willingham, in his own words, we sat down at his residence there in Archer City, Texas, a couple years ago. He told us the whole story from start to finish. And in this first clip we're about to listen to, he's going to talk about what happened that day when he first saw the object coming his way, and it was seen by everybody in the convoy. And it's a remarkable little clip if you guys want to run that.
Oh, sure. Want me to play it right now?
Yes.
All right.
We spotted a bright light, and I mentioned it to the B-47 pilot of our close communications equipment, and he's seen it also. Well, it kind of looked like, at first, like a star does, except it was closer. It's a real bright light. There was a little amber-looking color in it there once, or I thought it was, because I didn't take my eye off of it until... it was just a very bright, and I'd say before it made the 90-degree turn, it would look like it was that big to me right there, but there's no telling, it might have been 40 miles back over somewhere, 80. It was coming, looked like straight toward us, and all at once it made a 90-degree turn and started losing altitude, and I mentioned that to the B-47 pilot, and he said, yeah, I seen that. I said, well, I'd like to go see where it's going to hit down there. And he said, well, wait a minute, let me call Fort Worth. So he called headquarters over there at the Fort Worth field we stayed at, and they said, yeah, he can go. So I flew down there to see where it's hit. Well, right where it hit the first time looked to me like it, you know how you throw a ball or something and it'll hit, but it'll bounce. I figured this and here bounce. Looked like 200 feet out there further down the road. Oh, it began to fall apart, I guess. Just looked like somebody took a aluminum building and cut it up in little pieces and scattered it down through there. Well, the main thing I was looking at was seeing how the vegetation and the ditches and wash places and stuff like that. Because I already had in mind I wanted to go get one of them little aircraft, something that didn't take up too much room to sit down there and we could walk down there. And when I got back across the river the next time, I headed on back to my regular job. And all that time I'd been talking to the B-47 pilot. I was telling him what I looked at and what I seen.
Did he ask any questions?
Yeah, he wanted to know if I could tell what it was. And I said, no, I couldn't. The only thing is a lot of junk looked like somebody strode down through there. Came back and took my places with the aircraft. And we got nearly to El Paso. They picked up El Paso. Was going to put 4 jets to also cover for the B-47. And I turned around and come on back to Fort Worth. And I got in a little old plane and went to Corsicana, picked up Aeronica, and small airplane, flies slow. We went down and landed where the aircraft, that's where it was hit. And a little bit later, while we were there, the Mexican guard that was down there, which they were in uniform, they were, I figured, probably one of their army people. We went down and looked what we could. About that time, there was vehicles coming from every direction.
So, a very interesting story there about his initial account. Colonel Willingham actually, as he mentioned in the clip, after he was in F-86 when he had the initial sighting, and then he went back he received permission from his squadron leader to go back to base, and when he got back to Fort Worth, he picked up a small plane. He calls it an Aeronica, which was basically a 2-seater pilot trainer plane. It had a minimal equipment. I mean, it was just designed to be taken up for a couple hours to train pilots. But he had access to a small plane, and he knew it was going to take a small plane to land near the UFO crash site. And he actually took with him a gentleman named Jack Perkins, who was an electrical engineer and belonged to the CAP, Civilian Air Patrol Service unit that Colonel Willingham belonged to. So the two men, Jack Perkins and Robert Willingham, went back down to the area of Del Rio, Texas, which is in southwest Texas. And they actually set that small plane right alongside the wreckage. Just a few hundred feet from the river's edge, Rio Grande River, the international boundary between Texas and Mexico. And the story gets really weird after that, but I wanted to just establish, first of all, what happened that day in the initial sighting and how Colonel Willingham and his buddy got down to the location.
Yeah. Do you want me to play the other sound clip?
I'm not quite ready for that. I want to set the scene a little bit and maybe discuss some of the information that has come to light since the publication of our book. I want to go back, guys, and mention that our book was published in 2007. And it has received a lot of favorable reviews, and we've gotten very positive comments. I would say that 90% of the feedback we've received in the last 6 years since the book was published. I'm sorry, it was published in 2008, so 5 years ago. In the 5 years since the publication of the book, 90% of the feedback we've gotten has been very, very positive. And now, as you all know, there's a certain body of skeptics and people that some of them we feel are disinformation agents, who are in the business of trying to shoot down anybody's eyewitness testimony of a UFO
Torres,
encounter.
I was going to say, have you talked or dealt with Joe Nichols?
That sounds very familiar, and I probably had dealings with him. But anyway, like I was saying, a small percentage, 10% or less. And we knew we were going to get hit and criticized because this is a single witness story, albeit the witness seems to us to be highly credible. We have records from his military service. We have eyewitness testimony that is very, very compelling. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, I have many friends in the UFO investigation field. And very early on, my co-author Ruben Uriarte and I sought to kind of get a fix from some of our friends in the field. We had this very compelling story, but it was a single eyewitness, a single witness story. The advice that we got from our friends was to go ahead and put this out there, stir things up, and let's see if anybody comes forward with corroborating information, with additional details, and, in other words, stir up a firestorm, see what happens. The story was credible enough and compelling enough that we went ahead and published it, although we knew we were going to get hit, and we have been, by a small percentage of people over the years, and yet it remains one of our top-selling books and one of the books that has generated the most interest and the most talk and the most discussion. Colonel Willingham is still alive. We still talk to him from time to time. In fact, we did a national radio interview on the Jeff Rentz program, Colonel Willingham, Ruben, and I, about 2 years ago. And they linked up to Colonel Willingham by phone at his residence in Archer City, and we had a great chat. So, I mean, the other reason we knew we were going to get hit after we published the book is because, and I have a letter from the military archives people, we tried to get a release of all of Colonel Willingham's service records from the military, and they told us that it's very likely that they could not find them, and that it's very likely that a fire that occurred at their big military records facility in the late 60s or early 70s in Oklahoma wiped out the records pertaining to Mr. Colonel Willingham's military service. So the records that we have are very sketchy about his military service, and we knew that critics were going to hit us on that. And that's fair. It's good to have open dialogue and to have different point of views and to put it out there for discussion. But guys, the important thing to us is that Colonel Willingham kept this story to himself for decades. It happened in 1955. He did the NICAP affidavit in 1978, and he really didn't talk about it again until Ruben and I contacted him in 2007. So, I mean, he never sought publicity. He's never earned a penny from telling his story. He refused to take any funds from us when we told him we wanted to do a book on his story. So he never received a cent. He is an honest, forthright, nuts and bolts sort of guy. In the many hours of interviews that we did with Colonel Willingham, he never once speculated on what it was he saw, what what could it mean in terms of ETs or outer space or visitations to our Earth by alien beings. None of that. He just simply told us this amazing story of his own encounter, and which we're going to hear the second part of in a little bit. But he never really he's just not the kind of guy. Once you meet him, it'll take you about 5 seconds to figure out that he's not the kind of guy that just makes stuff up. I mean, he's kind of a homespun, as you could tell from the previous interview we ran. He's got very much of this Texas accent, you know, and he's a very down-to-earth, nuts and bolts guy. He doesn't embellish things, and he just tells things the way they are. It's quite as simple as that. So that's the reason we went ahead with the publication of the book, and we're very happy. Some additional information. Now, when we first contacted Colonel Willingham, he didn't know us. It took time to establish a trust relationship, of course. He had been burned in the past by unscrupulous journalists and members of, shall we say, shady UFO groups. So he had been burned in the past and was very, very cautious and hesitant with us at first. It was only after Reuben and I went to his home and spent time with him there in Archer City and he got comfortable with us that he started opening up. You know, he had been bullied and told that he was never to tell this story or there would be serious repercussions. He was told that in a number of occasions following his incident. Well, first of all, he and the entire flight crew was debriefed by the military at Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth after their sighting. And they had already been warned that they were not to disclose this. And then later he received a number of phone calls and other communications from high-ranking military officials telling him, including the military intelligence services, that he was not to speak of the incident, quote-unquote, down on the border to anyone ever. And so Colonel Willingham, you know, he kept that trust for many decades. And you know, he told Reuben and me, you know, I finally got to the point where I'm nearing the end of my life, and I'd like people to know what I experienced. I think it's important. And really at this point, I have so many medical problems, he told us, I really don't give a flip what they might do to me. They've denied me my military pension. You know, I'm in really bad health. It's near the end of my life. I want to start telling people about what happened to me. And so that's how the story came about. And people say, you know, when they listen to the audio clip that we just heard a while ago, people always tell us, well, you know, he sounds like a real hillbilly. Well, it's unfortunate that people judge other people just on the basis of mannerisms of speech. Colonel Willingham is a very intelligent person. I mean, you don't rise to be a colonel in the military services. And he was also involved with military intelligence in the 60s and 70s. You don't get to be in a high position in the military as he was without having it together. Now, of course, he's in his 80s, and as he told Reuben and me, this entire episode that I'm telling you about occurred over about a 30-minute period. He's talking about the amount of time he spent at the site of the UFO crash. And it occurred in one day of my life, of my entire life, 50 years ago, he said. So if some of the points in his remembering sound a little bit vague or maybe not as much detail as some people would like, you have to understand that this happened a long time ago and that he's now in his 80s. But what's remarkable to us is that over the course of about a year that we spent interviewing him, his story never wavered, never varied. He always told us the exact same thing in the exact same sequence. And the only thing I would say is that he filled in a few more details as he went along, as he got to trust us more.
It seems like a trustworthy source.
Yeah, we really felt that way, and like I say, 90% of the people we've talked to were very impressed by his testimony, his disclosure. There are so many military people who have experiences like this and then never talk about it, never disclose to anyone. Colonel Willingham is very much of a maverick in a lot of ways. Once you get to know him, he's very much of a rugged, self-made individual. And he's not the kind that takes any BS off of anybody. I mean, he was very upset at the way people treated him in the military after his incident, and he has no problem at all now speaking about what he experienced. So I'd like to pick up the story, if we might. We heard, first of all, that he saw the object. He and all of the flyers that were with him that day saw the object streak past them. It was doing zigzag 90-degree angle turns. It was flying at over 2,500 miles per hour. It was descending, and then he saw it crash, and he saw widespread debris in the Del Rio, Texas area. Then he went back in his F-86 to Carswell Air Force Base, turned in his jet, and came back down in a small trainer airplane, propeller plane, and landed it right next to the crash debris site, where he encountered a platoon of Mexican soldiers that were already at the scene. They had been encamped somewhere near the location. So they were there at the scene, and Colonel Willingham asked them what they were doing there. They said, "We were told to come here and guard the area until the U.S. Air Force arrived." Now keep in mind, this is like 200 feet from the edge of the Rio Grande River. So, I mean, it's right on the international boundary, just happens to have fallen on the Mexican side. So we're going to pick up the story in the next audio clip about what Colonel Willingham saw. He describes the debris field, huge chunks of pieces of the wreckage, and then the most interesting part, near the end of the clip you're about to hear, he finally gets a glimpse at the capsule section of the craft, or the passenger section, and he sees three strange beings inside it, as we'll hear in this next audio clip.
Well, I started up there, and here come all these Spanish soldiers come running over, and they was all armed, and I put up my hands like being arrested. But anyway, they come on up there, and I told them, I said, I just come down to see what crashed here. I was here a while ago in that F-84. And he said, you were? And I said, yeah. I spoke a little Spanish, but they were the lieutenant there. He spoke good English, so I talked to him. I'd say 150 there when I got there, and about 35 vehicles. I went in there, and I was talking to this Spanish lieutenant. Anyway, I talked to him, and we walked down through there, and he said, I never seen anything like it before. And I said, no, mostly it was all pieces of covering and stuff. It was all scattered everywhere. This in here had some solid pieces still scattered down through there. I walked right up and kicked a piece of it. Where it hit, there was a lot of small pieces, like 2 foot by 8 inches, maybe 2 foot by 28 inches, just different pieces off of it, you know. Then it got on up to where it stopped. It looked to me like that it was a piece of 10-inch pipe that was real shiny. And I don't know if that was part of the fuel consumption part of it or what it was. But he didn't know either, the Mexican didn't. They said it don't look like people. Well, it didn't look like human beings to me. I believe they were 3, and the lieutenant said they were 4. I never did see the other one. Well, they weren't dressed at all. They were in a lot of different pieces. I didn't see but one that had a complete top, but I wouldn't swear what he was even. They just, I don't know how you'd explain it, but they just, their heads, arms and stuff, their arms are little bitty. They look like broomsticks. Just got the glance in there, because he wouldn't let me go look in it. I just happened to be walking by it and looking in there.
So he just got a momentary glimpse when he saw the three beings. He described them as having the large heads, large almond-shaped eyes, very thin appendages, look like broomsticks, and he didn't see any blood or other residue from their bodies. They were not dressed in any sort of clothing or uniform that he could tell. They just appeared to be in their, he just saw their skin, their outer skin. They were very pale, and he actually had weapons pointed at him, and he was being prodded with a barrel of guns to move along. So the glance that he got inside the capsule compartment of the UFO was just momentary. It was just a fleeting moment. But it has stayed with him all these long years. And I don't know if you could tell, because I only played part of the total interview there in that last clip, but he became extremely emotional, and he had some very long pauses when he was describing the beings that he saw. I took the pauses out for the sake of, having a clear and concise audio to play, but he was very shaken up as soon as he started talking about the beings that he saw inside the ship. So it's a remarkable story.
So he said none of the beings were alive?
It did not appear to him, and in fact they were in pieces to a large extent. Only one of the three seemed to be fairly intact. So apparently, the violence of the crash was very pronounced. He described some very small pieces of debris scattered all along this furrow. He saw a large furrow in the earth that went for, a couple 100 feet, and then at the end of that furrow was what he describes as the capsule compartment, or the main passenger section of the ship. And it was in there, with a lot of poking and prodding of weapons being pushed up against his chest, that he just got a momentary glimpse of these beings inside the ship. And he probably spent less than 5 seconds looking at them out of his entire life of 86 years. And it happened over 50 years ago. So, and he didn't get a chance to really see a great deal of detail, but what he saw is very amazing and very compelling to us.
And did he talk about what the inside looked like where the aliens were at?
Yeah, he described it as being obviously some kind of a control panel, knobs, levers, buttons. Just in the momentary few seconds that he got a glimpse of, he could tell, it seemed very obvious to him in a general sense, that there were instruments and electronic equipment there. That's a very good question.
And the other thing I was wondering was, does he know if the United States military eventually did end up coming?
Well, here's the situation, and there's a lot more to this story than we'll be able to cover in an hour, but essentially what happened was he was in a small plane that had no lights, and it was not designed to go long distances. It was used for pilot training at one specific base or location. And it was getting to be near sundown. And the Mexican soldiers were talking about their general arriving at the scene momentarily. So Colonel Willingham and his friend Jack Perkins felt pressured, and they literally had weapons pointed at them, and they were being told that they needed to clear out before the Mexican general arrived.
Oh, I see what you mean.
And so they got back. They headed back toward their small plane, which was landed just nearby the wreckage. Headed back toward the plane. Colonel Willingham, who was still in his USAF flight suit from his, he just got off his F-86 and jumped into a car and went over to Corsicana, Texas, where he picked up the Aeronica. So anyway, he was still in his flight suit. He very nonchalantly, he says, leaned over and picked up a piece of the wreckage about the size of a standard hardcover book, maybe a little less than 8.5 by 11. If people go to our website roswellbooks.com and click on the Other Roswell, they'll see some pictures and videos of Colonel Willingham, including this strange piece of debris. It was obvious. It had a honeycomb structure inside. It was very light and metallic, and he picked it up and just very casually stuck it, unzipped his flight suit and stuck it, in his flight suit.
Yeah.
Well, they left the scene, and Colonel Willingham later had a military metallurgist laboratory run tests on that piece of metal, and right before the lab mysteriously closed down and moved virtually overnight, he could never get the evidence back from them, and he could never get a hold of anybody that he talked to when he took the piece of metal in for analysis. But right before that happened, one of the laboratory people told him, "We have never seen anything like this before, and it's quite clear that it's nothing made on Earth." And that was the last he heard before apparently the lab, which was under military contract, was shut down and moved overnight. And all attempts that Colonel Willingham made to find the major that he delivered the evidence to were unsuccessful. So anyway, so Colonel Willingham was forced to leave the scene, and he can only presume that there was an arrival of U.S. troops later at the crash site to recover the debris and take it wherever all such evidence is taken. This was only 8 years after the Roswell UFO crash, 1947. This was 1955. And Ruben Uriarte and I, who have looked at many crash retrieval cases, feel that there's probably 10 or 12 that have sufficient evidence and documentation to warrant serious inquiry. You go on some websites and they have lists of hundreds of supposed UFO crashes. But in our research, we find a handful, maybe 10 or 12, throughout all of history. And we really, we really think that Colonel Willingham's story, because we got to know him, because we spent time with him, and we understand him, and we understand that he doesn't have any external motivations for telling his story. In fact, he's mostly kept quiet about it. We really feel that he has no reason whatsoever to have made this up.
A quick question I was wondering, we have about 9 minutes left in our show. I was going to say, was this incident mentioned in the media at all, like newspapers or anything?
There are numerous mentions to Colonel Willingham's story in UFO material since 1978, when Colonel Willingham gave his statement to NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. We also found a blurb about it in one of the UFO civilian UFO groups published a newsletter in the 60s, and they interviewed Colonel Willingham, who at that point was involved in Civil Air Patrol in Pennsylvania. And he mentioned, he's talking about other UFO sightings that had been taking place in Pennsylvania at the time, and he makes the comment to the reporter, all of this activity reminds me of a UFO crash that I witnessed on the Mexican border many years ago. And so we found that little blurb, and that was in 1967. So we really felt at that point that he was, even way back then, just 12 years after it happened, it was in the back of his mind, and it occasionally would come out when he talked to people. But there was no other media coverage, of course, because of the fact that the military tried to keep it quiet. They debriefed all of the flight crew members and told them not to talk. They told Colonel Willingham that there would be serious repercussions if he ever spoke about what happened, quote, down on the border. And so there was never any media attention of any kind until this brief mention in 1967. And then in 1978, when Colonel Willingham finally told his story to a major UFO organization, which was NICAP.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. And Stanton Friedman's research on Roswell, what really triggered the whole Roswell, the attention to Roswell, came from Stanton Friedman's research into the case in 1979, 1980, the publication of the first book about Roswell called The Roswell Incident in 1980. And really, in terms of which story got disclosed first, the Colonel Willingham story was the first to be disclosed in terms of a crash retrieval. And in fact, some of the early investigators in the late 70s, 1980s that knew about the Willingham case, they expected it to be the major UFO crash story that would really garner all of the attention and the books and the media, and it didn't end up happening that way. It was just, it was just that Roswell captured the limelight and captured people's imagination. But a lot of those early UFO researchers really felt that the Colonel Willingham case would really have a lot of impact, which we think it does. But of course, we have to admit that, in Roswell there have been over 100 eyewitness affidavits to what was seen there, and in the Colonel Willingham case, we have mainly just a single eyewitness, and that's one of the reasons that people did not have the response that they did to Roswell.
Well, Mr. Torres, we have about 5 minutes left in the show, and at the end of every interview, we always invite our guests to talk about any upcoming books that they might be working on, any other projects or any lectures, any websites that they might have. Do you have anything of that? you wish to share?
It's interesting timing for you guys to have wanted to talk about the Other Roswell, my book. We are planning a major UFO conference in Del Rio, Texas, which is within 10 miles of where this incident happened. The city of Del Rio, Texas, it's a beautiful town. It's a beautiful city. We've been there on several occasions doing research, and we're hopeful that very soon people can attend a conference in which we'll be talking about the Other Roswell and similar events. And they can keep up with our upcoming conferences and projects by going to our website, roswellbooks.com.
Well, one thing I was going to say was I was looking at some of your other books on your website, or on your Amazon, whichever one, and I actually was going to say, we actually were interested in having you back on the show sometime in the next couple of months to talk about one of your other books also.
Yeah, and I'd like to get my co-author Ruben with me because, as I mentioned, my part of it is mainly doing the research and doing the writing, and Ruben is he's got over 30 years experience as a UFO investigator, so he adds an extra dimension. I'd certainly like to be on, and Ruben can also Skype in and be a part of the show. We would love to do that in the very near future. Just send me an email and we'll set it all up.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We'll have to send you and your co-investigator an email.
That sounds very good, and I have enjoyed the heck out of being on your show. I look forward to being on again in the future. We've got a lot of interesting projects going on. I have a new book coming out about a very famous UFO incident of the 1970s that has received very little publicity, and yet most serious UFO people, including Stanton Friedman, rank it in the top 10 of the most credible and significant UFO cases that have ever occurred on our planet.
Wow.
So we're going to be releasing this new book, and I can't really give many details about it right now, but it's going to be a definite interesting book.
Definitely. Well, again, we've really enjoyed having you on our show. You've been one of the top guests, I'd say. We've had Stanton Friedman, Frank Fischino, Jesse Marcel Jr. on our show,
people.
and I'd put you up there with them. Definitely.
All good, though. Thank you very much. I don't belong there, but I appreciate the words. Thank you.
Well, I guess we are going to play our outro song. But, yes, thanks for coming on the show again today, Noe. Like I said, we'll definitely have to have you back on the show.
Yes.
If anybody has any questions, you could go to roswellbooks.com and speak with Noe yourself.
Absolutely.
Or if for some reason you have a question you don't want to talk to him yourself, you could have us ask him. But again, today's show is... What's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I have a contact. I have a way to contact me on the website. It'll just go to my email, so that'd be perfect. Thanks a lot, guys.
And again, check out Noe Torres' book, The Other Roswell, if you're interested in what we talked about today, or he has a number of other books that he's researched or different incidents. And again, thanks, Noe, and we'll have to do it again here soon.
Have a great weekend, guys. Bye-bye.
You too.
Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a problem. I would like to introduce
Bigfoots Pad Paranormal